The current hot controversy in 2XKO isn't its name and isn't even the edging that Riot keeps inflicting on us as we wait with bated breath for next alpha, beta, or actual release. It's that when the game finally does get released, they only plan to have 10 champions out. People have been rather loudly upset at this. Granted, it's one of the smallest releases we've had from a modern fighter. In fact, only Skullgirls was smaller with, I believe, a debut of just like 8 characters. And possibly an eighth of the operational budget too, if we're being frank. There's a lot of concern that the game's going to stale out in a matter of weeks. The most common point of contention is that should everybody in match pick different characters from each other, you basically have seen 40% of the game's content right there and then. And even if you were to count every pairing as its own unique set, it'll take very little time for the game to get stale and figured out. To be blunt, the popular analysis of this is kind of bullshit. At least there are several reasons to believe that this is far too simplistic analysis to do for 2XKO and the genre as a whole any justice. The first hard rejection of the logic, a competitive game doesn't need massively asymmetrical gameplay to be interesting. It's often the case that any serious asymmetry between contending players or factions works against the interest of the game's competitive merit. Whether we're talking about something as bedrock as chess or Go, where contenders not only have equal access to resources and information, but identical access to both, or esports titles, like Counter-Strike's total lack of hero powers, and a deep centralization into optimal resource expenditure effectiveness, such as the classic M4 vs AK meta, it's never been the case that a compelling competitive title relies on endlessly iteratively different gameplay. Conversely, it's always been the case that a compelling competitive title allows endlessly iterative experiences as an emergent effect of the resources available to the players, no matter how limited they are. Famously, a 19 by 19 board and 2 colors that do the exact same thing like with the black and white stones of Go is all it takes to design a game so emergently complex that it took until modern times to create a computer powerful enough to challenge human intuition, and of such depth of tactical nuance that men have been driven to despair of the unexpected placement of individual keystones in novel sequences. So the hard rejection of the common complaint is as follows. If a game needs a dozen or more characters to be compelling, it necessitates that the game's variety and strategic depth to be front-loaded into those characters' uniqueness, and that they skew so differently from each other that the only form of differentiating expression is via those characteristics, rather than what's baked into the system and how that interacts with human decision-making. That necessarily implies a rather shallow game, one where RPS outcomes are decided primarily by the character selection screen. I would say it isn't very bold of me to say that this doesn't describe 2XKO's design team's ambitions at all. The pragmatic rejection of the common complaint is that their idealized scenario was never a strong indicator of the quality of a fighting game anyhow. Take for instance 2 of the most active fighting games in the modern era, Street Fighter 6 and Guilty Gear Strive. Of the latter, the current patch is arguably the most diverse to date, featuring a commonly agreed upon competitive top tier of more than 10 or more characters across a wide skew of playstyles and aesthetics. Yet there are very few people that would claim that the patch as is ideal, despite the surface level diversity of the characters. The relatively centralized system mechanics and tendency towards two-touch KOs produces similar and near deterministic outcomes despite this apparent diversity. If it doesn't have a good wild solid and guard crush, it probably is going to end up losing to Gold Lewis, Potemkin, or Nagoriyuki, and the rest of the top tier diversity has similarly explosive high reward potential to decide games off as few interactions as possible. Conversely, anybody that's gone through Street Fighter 6 matchmaking can tell you that the current state of the game is absolutely infested by Mai, and chronically so by Ken. Though importantly, this isn't reflected in tournament results, as the determinant for competitive success in Street Fighter 6 remains heavily skewed towards personal mastery more so than character selection. In fact, Street Fighter's structure leans closer to what I believe to be the ideal for the genre. That between 2 players of the same character, you can still tell who's on which side of the screen solely by the differences in how they pilot the same set of resources. While this isn't absent in Guilty Gear by any means, the games in their current form means Street Fighter offers significantly more breathing room for emergent expression to take the stage. Ultimately, a large roster primarily serves to act as casual bait. The more characters you have, the more likely that one of them is going to draw in a player that was previously indifferent. While I too want 2XKO to have more than just the 10 promised, that desire is rooted in my longtime history with the IP more so than my interest in the game on its own terms. But if we're talking about what makes a fighting game good, then any sober analysis of the genre ends up concluding that it's entirely possible to produce a fighting game with just 1 or 2 characters. It just needs to be a fighting game of such unimaginable nuance and strategic complexity that the level of expression available to such a small cast has the emergent potential of a game like Go. 2XKO was not a game. 2XKO should have a larger roster over time. But the question that we should be asking is 10 characters enough to sustain early interest in 2XKO? And rather, how well can 2XKO's core systems support emergent developments? Thus, I personally remain optimistic. The considerations they've put into the Fuse system means that the Darius you fight in a standard 2-player tag team can only loosely be compared to the Juggernaut-infused boss mode Darius that with immediate access to what's basically 2XKO's X Factor. Same with the Yumi mode and how that interacts with a team where one player is very good at parry timings to neutralize inbound damage, and the other player is better at playing the neutral. In fact, the more systems they leverage into the assist player, the more important human behavior becomes, in contrast to hard-coded system mechanics and character gameplay behavior. How well players can communicate or develop emergent coordinations to access defensive systems may end up just as much of a determinator in the game's outcome as their mastery of purely character-side mechanics. And the more true that is, the more important the human factor becomes, the more fundamentally interesting the game gets. And in a couple of weeks or 2, we get to see if 2XKO's designers agree. Fingers crossed, and hope I get it. And of course, follow me on YouTube, follow me on Twitch, follow me on Blue Sky for more fighting game content. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.